Death is the one certainty that unites every human being who has ever lived. No matter the culture, no matter the century, all lives eventually end. And yet, across the vast tapestry of civilizations, humanity has refused to accept that death is simply a void. From the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Mexico, from the temples of India to the islands of Japan, cultures separated by oceans and millennia all told stories of a place beyond life. A shadowed realm beneath the earth. A kingdom of silence, guarded by gods of death. But why? Why did civilizations with no contact imagine such similar landscapes of the afterlife? Why does every mythology speak of a boundary between the living and the dead, a river, a gate, a trial, that must be crossed by the soul? Is this evidence of some forgotten origin shared by all humanity, or does it reveal something deeper? The refusal of the human spirit to accept extinction? Consider the pattern. The Greeks envisioned Hades, where every soul descended, judged and divided between punishment or reward. The Egyptians described Osiris weighing the heart of the deceased against a single feather, to measure the truth of their life. In India, Yama waits, the first mortal to die, transformed into the cosmic judge who directs each spirit into cycles of rebirth. In Mexico, Mictlantecuhtli, the skeletal lord, oversees a treacherous journey of 9 levels through rivers of blood and mountains of stone before the soul can finally rest. And far to the east, China imagined Diyu, a labyrinth of courts where 10 kings preside over the punishment and purification of every sinner. While in Japan, Yomi is a place of corruption and stagnation, not fiery torment, but a bleak permanence, a shadow of existence from which there is no return. These visions are not identical. Some promise punishment. Others promise rebirth. Some describe an eternal silence. Others demand a perilous journey. Yet, despite their differences, the patterns echo like a chorus through time. A descent into the earth. A judge, a gatekeeper, or a trial. A fate determined not only by death, but by the life that was lived. So one must ask, where do these visions come from? Are they mere metaphors, born from humanity's fear of the dark, the grave, and the unknown? Or do they preserve, in fragmented form, a deeper truth that transcends culture and history? The underworld is not merely a myth. It is a mirror. In its shadowed rivers and silent gates, every society projected its values, its fears, its morality. Some saw it as a place of justice, where every deed was weighed. Others saw it as inevitability, neither good nor evil, simply the natural continuation of existence. But in every case, the message is the same: death is not the end. In this investigation, the journey will descend into 6 great visions of the afterlife, from the Greek Hades to the Egyptian Duat, from India's Yama to Mexico's Mictlán, from China's Diyu to Japan's Yomi. Each will reveal how humans across the world shaped death into story, and story into meaning. Perhaps these myths endure not because they describe a physical place, but because they answer a need, the need to believe that when breath ceases, when the heart grows still, the story does not simply stop. But if every civilization imagined an underworld, was it because they were all wrong in the same way? Or because, on some level, they were all right? Beneath the mountains and valleys of Greece, hidden from mortal sight, the ancients imagined a vast and shadowed world. It was not simply a place of torment, nor a paradise for the blessed, but a complex kingdom ruled by a god who rarely left its depths. His name was Hades, the unseen one. Unlike Zeus, who reigned over the heavens, or Poseidon, who commanded the seas, Hades presided over what the Greeks called the realm of the dead. To the living, Hades was a figure of dread, his very name spoken with hesitation. Yet in Greek thought, he was not evil. He did not seek to destroy mankind, nor revel in cruelty. His role was inevitable, impartial, and absolute, to guard the boundary between the living and the dead. Once a soul crossed that line, there was no return. The journey into this underworld began at the moment of death. According to legend, the spirit of the deceased would drift from the body like a faint shadow, lingering on the threshold until guided to the river that divided the realms. That river was the Styx, black and silent, its waters believed to hold unbreakable oaths. To cross, the soul needed the ferryman, Charon, a grim figure cloaked in rags, who demanded a single coin as payment. For this reason, Greeks placed an obol or a dannik in the mouth of their dead, a final toll to ensure safe passage. Without it, the soul was said to wander aimlessly, trapped between worlds, never able to rest. Beyond the river stretched the wide plains of the Asphodel Meadows, a realm of countless shadows. Here, the majority of souls lingered, neither punished nor rewarded, existing in a muted reflection of life. It was not torment, but it was not joy either. To the Greeks, this was the fate of most humans, a pale continuation of existence, stripped of passion and purpose. But for a few, the afterlife held other destinies. Those who had offended the gods, who had committed crimes so great they echoed through eternity, were hurled into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the earth. In this abyss, surrounded by walls of bronze and guarded by monstrous beings, the wicked suffered eternal punishment. Titans who had challenged Zeus were chained here, gnawed by serpents, crushed beneath stones, or bound in torment without end. It was not a place for ordinary mortals but for enemies of the divine order. In contrast, heroes and the righteous were sent to the Elysian fields. This was a land of eternal spring, where the sun shone gently and meadows bloomed forever. Here, warriors who had fallen bravely in battle, poets favored by the muses, or mortals blessed by the gods found their rest. Later traditions even spoke of the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise beyond the western sea, where a chosen few would dwell in eternal bliss. At the heart of this realm stood Hades himself, seated upon a throne beside his queen, Persephone. Her presence revealed another layer of the Greek vision of death. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, abducted by Hades to become his consort. For half the year, she remained in the underworld, and during this time the earth grew barren, crops withered, and winter spread across the land. When she returned to her mother in spring, life blossomed again. This cycle of descent and return became a mythic explanation for the seasons, but also a symbol. Death was not only an end, it was a rhythm, a necessary counterpart to life itself. The underworld was also a place of judgment. In some traditions, 3 judges presided over the souls of the dead: Minos, Rhadamanthys, and Aeacus. Each weighed the deeds of mortals and assigned their eternal place, whether in Tartarus, the meadows, or the Elysian fields. The moral fabric of Greek society was reflected here. Honor, piety, and justice carried weight even after death. Yet, despite its complexity, the Greek underworld was not built to comfort. Unlike later religions that promised heaven for the faithful, the Greek vision was somber. For the majority, death meant fading into a shadow of existence. The rare exceptions of Elysium were reserved for heroes and those touched by the divine. To live on in song and memory was, for most Greeks, a far more desirable immortality than the underworld itself. And yet, within this bleakness, the Greeks projected their deepest truths. Life was fragile, fleeting, and often beyond human control. Death was not evil, but it was absolute. The gods ruled, and mortals obeyed, both in life and beyond it. Hades did not chase men, but once they came to him, he never let them go. For the ancient Greeks, the underworld was more than myth. It was a reminder. Every funeral rite, every coin placed in the mouth of the dead, every offering at a tomb reinforced the belief that the boundary between life and death was thin, and that without proper respect, the soul might lose its way. It was not only a geography of the afterlife, but a moral map of existence itself. In the silence of Hades' realm, the Greeks confronted the ultimate truth, that to be human was to live briefly under the sun, and then to walk, inevitably, into shadow. In the land of the Nile, where death was as present as the rising sun, the Egyptians imagined the afterlife not as a shadowed silence, but as a journey, a trial, and ultimately a continuation. To them, life and death were not opposites. They were part of the same eternal cycle, a rhythm reflected in the flooding of the Nile, the movement of the sun across the sky, and the burial of a body into the earth only to rise again in spirit. The Egyptian underworld was called the Duat, a vast and mysterious realm lying beneath the horizon. Unlike the Greek Hades, the Duat was not uniform. It was a labyrinth of rivers, caverns, gates, and guardians. To reach eternal life, the soul had to pass through its dangers, guided by spells, prayers, and rituals carefully preserved in papyrus scrolls placed inside the tomb. These collections of incantations became known as the Book of the Dead, though the Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. It was less a story of death than a manual of rebirth. The journey began with the separation of the Ka, the vital essence, from the body. The corpse was preserved through mummification, a sacred process meant to keep the vessel intact for eternity. The the personality or spirit of the individual, would then embark on the passage through the duat. Along the way, it would encounter trials, gates guarded by serpents and demons, lakes of fire, and rivers of darkness. Yet, the greatest trial awaited at the Hall of Two Truths, where the soul would stand before Osiris, the Lord of the Dead. Here unfolded one of the most iconic images of Egyptian mythology, the weighing of the heart. The heart was believed to be the seat of conscience, memory, and morality. In the hall, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and protector of tombs, placed the heart of the deceased upon a great scale. On the other side lay the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth, balance, and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter or equal in weight to the feather, the soul was deemed pure and truthful. It would be allowed to join the blessed dead, dwelling in the field of reeds, a perfect reflection of earthly Egypt, filled with fertile fields, rivers, and abundance, where families reunited and life continued eternally in peace. But if the heart was heavy, weighed down by lies, injustice, or sin, the verdict was final. The soul would be devoured by Ammit, the monstrous hybrid of crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus. Known as the Eater of the Dead, Ammit did not torment. She annihilated. For the Egyptians, this was the true horror of death. Not eternal punishment, but the end of existence, the erasure of identity, the second death. The presence of this trial reflected the central concern of Egyptian civilization: order against chaos, Maat against Isfet. Life was fragile, and chaos always threatened to undo the harmony of the cosmos. The judgment of the soul mirrored this worldview. To live in balance, to uphold justice and respect the gods, meant to join eternity. To fail meant dissolution. Unlike the Greeks, who imagined the underworld as a fate common to all, the Egyptians created an afterlife that was profoundly moral. Each individual's destiny depended on their choices in life. Wealth, status, or power mattered little in the Hall of Truth. Even the pharaoh's heart could tip heavier than the feather. The eternal fate of a king and a farmer rested on the same balance. Yet, the Egyptian underworld was not only about judgment. It was also about transformation. The nightly journey of the sun god Ra through the duat reflected the same cycle faced by every soul. Each night, Ra sailed through darkness, confronting serpents and chaos, only to rise again at dawn. For the Egyptians, this cosmic drama confirmed that death was not the end. Just as Ra was reborn each morning, so too could the righteous soul emerge from the duat into eternal light. This belief shaped every aspect of Egyptian society. Tombs were not graves but gateways, carefully designed to assist the soul's passage. Hieroglyphs carved into walls described the journey, spells were recited to ward off dangers, amulets were placed on the body to protect the heart during its weighing. Even the pyramids themselves were monuments to eternity, colossal steps leading the soul from earth to the divine. In this vision, Osiris stood as both judge and savior. Once a king upon the earth, Osiris had been murdered by his brother Set, dismembered, and restored to life by his wife, Isis. His resurrection made him the eternal ruler of the dead, the proof that life after death was possible. To join Osiris was not to fade into shadow but to participate in a divine order that transcended mortality. The Egyptian underworld, then, was not merely a place of fear. It was a promise. For those who lived in truth, death was a doorway to an eternal Egypt, fertile and abundant, free of suffering. For those who lived in falsehood, death was obliteration, the silence of Ammit's jaws. To the modern mind, this vision may appear elaborate, but to the Egyptians, it was essential. Death was everywhere. In the deserts, in the river, in the fragility of crops. To imagine nothing beyond was unthinkable. The duat gave structure to the unknowable, and the weighing of the heart gave meaning to human life. Every action, every choice, every word spoken carried eternal weight. In the end, the Egyptian vision of the underworld was not simply about death. It was about life. To live in harmony with Maat was to assure a place in eternity. To betray it was to vanish forever. And so, for thousands of years, Egyptians built monuments to eternity, wrote spells to guide the soul, and placed their hope in Osiris, in Anubis, in the balance of the heart and the feather. In their silence, they remind us of something timeless, that death, far from being an end, may only be the measure of how life was lived. In the ancient imagination of India, death was not an absolute ending, but a turning point. The body withered, but the soul, the Atman, continued, carried forward into cycles of rebirth. To understand the Indian vision of the underworld is to step into a philosophy where death itself is not final, but part of a greater rhythm of existence. At the center of this vision stands Yama, the first mortal to die. According to Vedic tradition, Yama once walked among men as a king. But he was the first to cross the threshold into death, and in doing so, he carved a path for all others to follow. Elevated to divine status, he became the ruler of the departed, the judge of souls, and the guardian of the other world. His very name, Yama, comes from the root meaning to restrain or to control, fitting for one who governs the boundary between life and death. Unlike Hades, who kept souls within his realm, or Osiris, who weighed the heart once, Yama presided over something far more intricate, the endless cycles of samsara, the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. Each soul, after death, was said to appear before him. Seated in a great hall, Yama examined the deeds of one's life, guided by the principles of Dharma, the law of cosmic order and moral duty. It was not merely divine whim, but the weight of actions, the karma of a lifetime, that determined what came next. To aid him in this task, Yama was not alone. He was said to have two fearsome dogs, with 4 eyes each, who guarded the path of souls and ensured that none strayed from their journey. Some texts describe them as guides, sniffing out the souls of the dead and leading them toward their master's throne. The image reflects the inevitability of Yama's reach. No soul, however far it wandered, could escape the order of death. The judgment before Yama was not final in the way of Egyptian annihilation or Greek eternal assignment. Instead, it was transitional. A soul might be sent to Naraka, realms of torment where sins were purged through fire, ice, or pain. But this punishment was not eternal. It was a cleansing, a preparation. When the karmic debts were repaid, the soul would be reborn. Others, who lived with righteousness and devotion, might ascend to Swarga, a heavenly realm filled with pleasures, joy, and proximity to the gods. Yet even this was temporary. When the merit of their good karma expired, the soul would descend again into the cycle of rebirth. The ultimate goal, however, was not Swarga, nor the avoidance of Naraka. It was liberation, moksha, the release from samsara, the escape from the endless wheel. To achieve moksha was to be freed from Yama's judgment, to transcend even the gods, dissolving into union with Brahman, the eternal reality that underlies all existence. In this sense, Yama's role was paradoxical. He was feared as the Lord of Death, but also revered as the guide who pushed the soul forward toward liberation. Indian mythology describes Yama as a stern yet just figure. He is often depicted with green or red skin, wearing a crown, seated upon a black buffalo, carrying a mace or a noose to capture the souls of the dead. Unlike the skeletal lords of other mythologies, Yama is not a monster. He is a king, a judge, an inevitable presence. To live with Dharma was to prepare for his gaze. To live in chaos was to invite his wrath. The imagery of Yama and his courts reflects the Indian worldview, that life is not a straight line but a circle, an unending cycle of beginnings and endings. Death was not feared as extinction but endured as necessity. What mattered was not avoiding Yama, but living in such a way that when the soul stood before him, the weight of karma would lead not into darkness but closer to freedom. This belief infused Indian culture with rituals surrounding death. Families performed shraddha, ceremonies to honor ancestors, offering food and prayers to nourish the spirits of the departed and ease their journey. Hymns in the Rigveda invoke Yama, calling him king of the ancestors, ruler of the righteous, and friend to the pious. Death was not alien, but woven into the order of existence, a gate as natural as birth. In contrast to Greece or Egypt, where the underworld is a place of finality, the Indian vision is one of motion. The soul never rests, not permanently, until it escapes the cycle. Naraka punishes but also cleanses. Swarga rewards but also binds. Only moksha liberates. Yama stands at the center of this cosmic mechanism, his judgment a reflection not of divine favor, but of one's own actions echoing through eternity. In this way, Yama embodies the deepest truths of Indian philosophy. Death is not the enemy. It is the measure. Every thought, every action, every choice carries weight, binding the soul to the wheel or loosening its chains. And beyond the wheel, beyond Yama himself, lies a freedom that cannot be judged, only attained. Thus, in India, the underworld is not simply a realm of shadows, nor a kingdom of silence. It is the pathway of the soul, watched over by Yama, stern but fair, eternal reminder that death is never the end, but always the beginning of another journey. Far from the temples of Greece and the pyramids of Egypt, across oceans and centuries, the peoples of ancient Mexico imagined an afterlife unlike any other. For the Aztecs and their neighbors, death was not defined by morality alone, nor determined by judgment in a hall of gods. Instead, it was the path itself, the arduous and inevitable journey into the depths of the earth, that shaped the destiny of the soul. The Aztecs called it Mictlán, the land of the dead. It lay far beneath the surface, 9 layers deep, a world of trials and darkness ruled by Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli, the skeletal lord and lady of death. Unlike the Egyptian field of reeds or the Greek Elysium, Mictlán was not a paradise, nor was it a place of torment reserved for sinners. It was the universal destination of most souls, regardless of how they had lived. To die was to begin the journey, and every soul, noble or common, faced the same long road. The only exceptions were those whose deaths connected them to the gods in special ways. Warriors who died in battle, women who perished in childbirth, and victims of sacrifice were believed to ascend instead to the heavens, joining the sun or other divine realms. But for the majority, the path to Mictlán was inescapable. The journey was neither swift nor easy. The soul wandered for 4 years before reaching its final resting place, passing through 9 distinct levels, each filled with obstacles and trials. The first was at Mictlán, the place of the dog. Here, souls encountered a vast river that could only be crossed with the help of a dog, most often imagined as the Mictlantecuhtli, a hairless dog still revered in Mexico today. Families would often bury their dead with such animals, or with effigies, to ensure their loved one could cross the waters. Without the dog's guidance, the soul would be left stranded. Beyond the river lay mountains that clashed against one another, crushing anything caught between. Souls had to find their way through without being destroyed. Then came obsidian hills sharp as blades, where winds cut like knives. After that, a place where icy winds pierced the flesh, followed by a region of banners where invisible warriors forced souls to march endlessly. Each level stripped away more of the soul's earthly ties, a slow unmaking of the self as it journeyed deeper into the realm of death. One of the most terrifying stages was the River of Blood, where jaguars prowled, attacking and consuming those who faltered. Another level forced the soul to wander in total darkness, unable to see, guided only by memory and instinct. Only after enduring all 9 trials could the soul finally reach the deepest layer, Mictlán, the true resting place. Here, in the silent halls of Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli, the soul was released into eternal stillness. Unlike in Greece or Egypt, there was no final judgment to weigh good and evil. The trials of Mictlán were not moral but inevitable, reflecting the Aztec vision of life as a struggle against forces greater than oneself. Death was not a punishment, it was a continuation of the eternal cycle of endurance. Every soul faced hardship. Every soul faced the journey. The skeletal lord of death, Mictlantecuhtli, embodied this inevitability. Often depicted as a skeleton with gaping jaws, adorned with bones and owls, he was both terrifying and neutral. His consort, Mictlantecuhtli, shared his rule, presiding over festivals of the dead and rituals that honored the ancestors. Together, they did not torment, but they held dominion. They did not decide who entered Mictlán, they simply awaited all who came. This vision of death reveals much about the Aztec worldview. Life was fragile, constantly threatened by famine, war, and sacrifice. The gods demanded blood to sustain the cosmos, and death was never far from daily life. To imagine an afterlife of struggle was to mirror the struggle of existence itself. Yet, there was also dignity in endurance. To reach Mictlán, to survive the trials and finally rest, was to complete the cycle, to lay down the burdens of mortality in the halls of the dead. Echoes of this belief still live on today. In Mexico, the Day of the Dead honors the ancestors not as lost forever, but as companions who continue to walk beside the living. Altars filled with food, flowers, and candles are offerings meant to guide them back for a night, bridging the world of the living and the realm of Mictlán. Beneath the festive colors lies the same ancient truth: death is not absence. It is presence in another form. In Mictlán, the Aztecs saw not a place of hope, nor of despair, but of inevitability. A place where all paths converge, and all lives, whether noble or humble, must face the same long road into shadow. It was a reminder that death is not conquered. It is endured. And in the endurance lies the final rest. In the imagination of ancient China, death was not a single threshold, but a journey through courts, judgments, and punishments, a process as intricate as the bureaucracy of the living world. The realm was called Diyu, a vast and layered underworld where every soul passed after death. Unlike the Greek or Egyptian visions, Diyu was not eternal damnation, nor was it immediate paradise. It was a labyrinth of trials, ruled not by one god but by 10 kings, each presiding over a different court of justice. The origins of Diyu can be traced to a fusion of Taoist beliefs, Buddhist ideas of karmic retribution, and folk traditions rooted deep in Chinese culture. Together, they created a vision of the afterlife that mirrored the society above, structured, hierarchical, and relentlessly ordered. At the center of this realm stood Yanluo Wang, also known as King Yen or the Lord of Death. His image derived from the Indian god Yama, carried into China through the spread of Buddhism. But in China, he was transformed into a magistrate, seated behind a vast desk, scrolls of each person's life unfurled before him. He was neither purely merciful nor cruel, but a judge who measured deeds with the precision of law. Around him, 9 other kings presided over their own courts, each responsible for a different domain of punishment. To enter Diyu was to stand trial. The soul appeared before the kings, confronted with records of its actions in life. If the soul had committed sins, it was sent into realms of punishment, pits of fire, lakes of ice, mountains of blades. Yet these torments, however severe, were not eternal. They were meant to purify, to burn away the weight of wrongdoing, to balance the karmic scales. When the punishment was complete, the soul could leave Diyu and return to the cycle of rebirth. The vision of Diyu was vast and terrifying. Legends describe souls forced to climb mountains covered in sharp knives, every step cutting their flesh. Others were cast into boiling cauldrons, burned until their sins were consumed. Some were sent into icy caverns where endless cold froze the spirit into stillness. Others wandered halls where tongues were cut from liars, eyes were gouged from the deceitful, and hands were severed from the corrupt. Each punishment was tailored to the crime, a cosmic reflection of justice. And yet, this was not cruelty for its own sake. Diyu was less a hell than a court of correction, a place where the soul was broken and reformed, so that it could be sent once more into the cycle of reincarnation. Even the harshest of punishments had an end. For the Chinese, this mirrored the moral truth of life. No deed vanished without consequence, but no soul was beyond redemption. The journey through Diyu ended at the 10th court, where the wheel of rebirth awaited. Here presided the final judge, who determined the soul's next life. Would it rise into a human body again, perhaps rewarded with health, wealth, or wisdom? Would it fall into an animal form, burdened by past sins? Or would it ascend into one of the celestial realms, closer to the immortals? Before reincarnation, every soul was said to drink the potion of forgetfulness, brewed by the goddess Meng Po. Standing at the bridge of oblivion, souls drank the elixir and lost all memory of their past lives. Only then could they step into the world again, newborn and unaware, carrying the weight of karma unseen but unforgotten by the cosmos. This vision reveals much about Chinese thought. Life and death were not opposites but 2 sides of a cycle, bound together by moral cause and effect. Diyu was not simply punishment, it was justice, correction, and purification. Every act, every word, every hidden deed was recorded and balanced. The bureaucracy of the living was mirrored in the courts of the dead, a cosmic order that extended beyond the grave. Yet beneath the terror of its imagery, there was also hope. No soul was lost forever. Even the condemned could emerge purified, reborn into new opportunity. Death was not the end, but a passage through darkness into another beginning. In this way, Diyu stood as both warning and reassurance. To live unjustly was to invite torment in the courts of the dead. To live with compassion and virtue was to pass more swiftly through its halls. But for all, the wheel turned. All who lived returned, reshaped by fire and ice, until the balance was finally achieved. The labyrinth of Diyu reminds us of something universal, that the human need for justice extends even beyond the grave. And in the silence of its 10 courts, the soul is confronted with the truth that nothing is ever truly forgotten. In the myths of Japan, death was not a gate to purification or judgment, nor a cycle of trials to be endured. It was a place of stillness, of corruption, of silence. The Japanese called it Yomi, the land of gloom, the shadowed realm beneath the earth, where the dead wandered without hope of return. Unlike the ordered courts of China's Diyu or the moral trials of Egypt, Yomi was not about justice. It was inevitability, the stain of death itself. The story begins with Izanami, the primordial goddess who, alongside her brother and consort Izanagi, gave birth to the islands of Japan and the deities of creation. When Izanami died giving birth to the fire god, Izanagi descended into Yomi to bring her back. What he found was not the radiant goddess he had loved, but a shadow of her former self. Her body was corrupted, crawling with maggots, her face hidden in darkness. She warned him that it was already too late. She had eaten the food of Yomi and could not return to the land of the living. Horrified, Izanagi fled, pursued by the spirits of Yomi and by the fury of his lost wife. When he reached the surface, Izanagi rolled a massive boulder across the entrance to Yomi, sealing the passage forever. The barrier became known as the Yamatsu Hirasaka, the slope that leads to Yomi. From that day, the living and the dead were divided. And with that division came impurity. In Japanese thought, death itself was defilement, not moral sin, but a pollution that clung to the body and soul. To touch death was to risk corruption. Rituals of purification became central to Shinto practice, as the living sought to cleanse themselves from the shadow of Yomi. Unlike the moral judgments of Greece or Egypt, Yomi was not a place where the good were rewarded and the wicked punished. All who died descended there, except for a few chosen souls carried to heavenly realms. Yomi was not fiery torment, nor paradise. It was a vast, dark plain where the dead wandered in silence. Its horror was not pain but permanence. Once there, the soul could not leave. Later Buddhist influence added new layers to the Japanese vision of the afterlife. Through Buddhism, the Japanese adopted the concept of jigaku, hells of fire and punishment resembling the Chinese Diyu. Yet Yomi remained distinct, a native vision, older, more primal. Jigaku was about karmic justice. Yomi was about the unchangeable reality of death. The image of Izanagi fleeing from Izanami carries deep symbolic weight. In it, life and death are forever separated. The living may long for the dead, but to look back is to confront decay. The boundary must remain sealed. This myth echoed into Japanese culture as a reminder that death is not a doorway to renewal but a shadow to be accepted, purified, and distanced from the world of the living. And yet, Yomi was not entirely severed from the present. Certain sacred sites in Japan were believed to be entrances to the land of the dead. The Yamatsu Hirasaka itself, marked by stones and shrines, was venerated as the threshold. Some caves and mountains were thought to connect the living to the shadow realm, places where priests and shamans could commune with ancestral spirits. In this sense, Yomi was not only feared but respected. It was the realm of ancestors, forever beyond, yet never forgotten. What makes Yomi striking is its simplicity. Where other cultures filled the afterlife with elaborate trials, judges, or paradises, Japan envisioned a single truth: death is darkness. It strips away beauty, love, and vitality, leaving only corruption and shadow. The tragedy of Izanami is not her punishment, but her transformation, from the goddess of creation to a queen of decay. And yet, within this bleak vision lies a profound reflection. By making death impure, the Japanese heightened the value of life and the importance of purity rituals. Shinto practices of cleansing with water, salt, and fire all stem from the need to guard against the taint of Yomi. Death was inevitable, but life demanded renewal, cleansing, and reverence. Yomi was not a place of fear alone. It was a reminder. To live was to shine briefly under the light of the sun. To die was to pass into shadow. No reward, no punishment, only stillness. It was not hope that sustained the Japanese vision of the afterlife, but acceptance. And in that acceptance, perhaps, a different kind of wisdom. That life itself is sacred because it ends. Beyond Greece, Egypt, India, Mexico, China, and Japan, the imagination of humanity continued to shape visions of the afterlife. Even in distant lands, where civilizations had no contact with one another, the belief in an unseen realm persisted. It was as if the idea of death's domain was a shadow written into the human soul, impossible to silence, inevitable as nightfall. In the far north, the Norse people imagined Helheim, the cold and silent realm ruled by Hel, daughter of Loki. Unlike the fiery Christian hell that came later, Helheim was not a place of eternal torture. It was a land of frost and mist, where those who died without glory in battle were sent. Warriors who fell with honor were carried instead to Valhalla, the hall of Odin, where they feasted and prepared for Ragnarok, the final battle. Yet for the rest, for those who died of sickness, old age, or misfortune, Helheim awaited. Its presence reflected a culture that valued courage above all, shaping death itself into a continuation of the warrior's path. To die without battle was not wickedness, but it was obscurity. And in obscurity, the soul faded into hell's cold embrace. Far across the oceans, the peoples of the Americas told their own visions. Among the Maya, the underworld was known as Xibalba, the place of fright. It was a realm of trials ruled by sinister deities who delighted in trickery. Souls had to pass through rivers of blood, cross houses filled with darkness, cold, and blades, and survive encounters with gods who mocked and deceived them. Unlike the impartial judgment of Osiris or Yama, the lords of Xibalba treated death as a cruel game. Survival was uncertain, and only cunning or divine favor could guide a soul through. Among the Hopi of North America, the underworld was not a place of torment but of origin. They believed the first people had emerged from a world beneath the earth, led upward by a trickster spirit. To them, the land below was not only where souls returned after death, but also where humanity itself began. Death was not exile, but a return to the source. The Guarani of South America spoke of an afterlife reached by a long crossing. The souls of the dead were guided by spirits over perilous bridges or rivers, where their fate depended on the purity of their lives. For some, the journey led to a paradise of abundance. For others, the crossing failed, and the soul wandered forever. Even in smaller tribal traditions, echoes of these themes emerge: the descent, the crossing, the trial, the return to origins. Each variation reveals how cultures used the afterlife as a mirror of their values. The Norse placed glory above all, dividing the honored from the forgotten. The Maya imagined death as a trial of cunning, reflecting their fascination with games, sacrifice, and cosmic cycles. The Hopi and Guarani saw death as a return to beginnings, an echo of journeys across rivers and caverns that mirrored the landscapes around them. Despite their diversity, these visions all share one truth: no people could accept death as simple extinction. Whether as a cold plain, a fiery trial, a labyrinth, or a return to origins, every culture gave shape to the silence beyond. And in that shape, they found meaning. The voices of the dead may never be heard, but the stories told about them endure. From the misty plains of Helheim to the caverns of Xibalba, from the ancestral worlds of the Hopi to the crossings of the Guarani, humanity has always imagined that the end is not an end, but a passage. A passage through darkness, into memory, into something beyond. From the frozen plains of Helheim to the fiery pits of Diyu, from the shadowed silence of Yomi to the labyrinthine journey of Mictlan, humanity has never been content to see death as simple nothingness. Across civilizations, the underworld takes shape in startlingly similar ways, even among cultures with no contact across oceans or centuries. Yet, in the differences, we glimpse the distinct values that shaped each society. First, the similarities. Nearly every culture imagined death as a journey, a passage from one realm to another. Whether by crossing the river Styx in Greece, the waters of Mictlantecuhtli in Mexico, or the fragile bridge of the Guarani, the soul does not simply vanish. It must move. It must traverse a threshold that separates the living from the dead. This journey often requires guidance. Charon's boat, the Mictlantecuhtli dog, ancestral spirits, or the judgment of Yama and Yenluo Wang. The message is clear: death is not solitary. It is part of a cosmic order, where even in the silence of the grave, the soul is not abandoned. Another shared element is the presence of guardians or judges. The Greeks spoke of Minos, Rhadamanthys, and Aeacus. The Egyptians placed Osiris, Anubis, and the devouring Ammit at the heart of judgment. The Chinese imagined 10 kings, each presiding over a domain of punishment. In India, Yama himself weighs the karma of every life. Even in cultures with no centralized judgment, like Japan's Yomi, the very corruption of the dead becomes its own form of inevitability, a silent verdict that all must bear. In every case, the afterlife is not chaotic. It is structured, ordered, overseen by powers greater than the human will. Then there is the theme of punishment and reward. In Greece, heroes found rest in the Elysian fields, while the wicked were hurled into Tartarus. In Egypt, the righteous entered the field of reeds, while the unjust were consumed by Ammit. In China, the guilty endured punishment in Diyu until purified, while the virtuous ascended to better reincarnations. In India, Naraka cleansed sins, while Swarga offered temporary joy, but both were impermanent steps on the way to ultimate liberation. Even the Aztecs, who imagined Mictlan as the fate of most souls regardless of morality, distinguished those who died in battle or childbirth, granting them ascension to divine realms. The underworld, then, is not only a place of the dead, but a reflection of life's values. Each culture projected its deepest concerns onto the realm beyond. For the Greeks, where honor and memory defined greatness, the afterlife offered only shadow to most, with paradise reserved for heroes, a reflection of their reverence for glory and song. For the Egyptians, obsessed with order and balance, the weighing of the heart against the feathers symbolized their cosmic struggle against chaos. For the Indians, where philosophy turned on the cycles of existence, death became a doorway in the wheel of samsara, a chance to ascend or descend depending on karma. For the Chinese, with their deep traditions of law and bureaucracy, the afterlife was a mirror of earthly courts, where every deed was recorded and judged. For the Japanese, where purity and pollution shaped ritual life, death itself became the greatest defilement, Yomi, a realm of shadow that reflected the need for cleansing among the living. For the Mexica and other peoples of Mesoamerica, where struggle defined existence, death became a long and arduous journey, endured by all, echoing the hardships of life itself. Even the landscapes of the underworld share patterns. Rivers appear again and again, flowing as boundaries between life and death. Mountains rise as obstacles. Darkness covers plains where souls wander. Fire and ice punish the guilty, extremes of nature symbolizing the extremes of suffering. The geography of death mirrors the geography of the living world, magnified into myth. Yet the differences are equally revealing. Where the Greeks and Egyptians placed emphasis on moral judgment, the Aztecs imagined inevitability. Where India and China envisioned cycles of rebirth, Japan accepted permanence in shadow. Where the Norse exalted warriors, the Hopi and Guarani saw death as a return to origins. In these contrasts, we see the diversity of human fear and hope. Some long for justice, others for continuation, others for release, and some for reunion. Taken together, these visions suggest something profound. The underworld is not simply about death. It is about life, about what each culture valued, feared, or longed for most deeply. The Greeks taught that glory in life was the only true immortality. The Egyptians promised that truth and balance would carry one into eternity. The Indians revealed that liberation from desire and attachment was the highest goal. The Chinese warned that no action escapes record, and justice waits even beyond the grave. The Japanese reminded that life's purity matters because death is inevitable corruption. The Mexica showed that endurance itself is sacred, that to persist through trials is the essence of existence. So one must ask, why are these patterns universal? Did ancient peoples share stories that spread across continents, fragments of a single forgotten myth? Or do these visions emerge from something deeper, something within the human condition itself? Rivers, mountains, trials, judges. Are these not symbols born from life itself, translated into the language of death? In every myth, the underworld is a mirror. It reflects humanity back upon itself. The fear of darkness becomes the plane of shadows. The burden of conscience becomes the weighing of the heart. The struggle of survival becomes the 9 trials of Mictlan. The structures of society, kings, courts, warriors, laws, become the architecture of the world beyond. Death becomes the canvas upon which life paints its truths. And so, across every culture, the question lingers. Is the underworld only metaphor, the projection of fear and hope? Or does its universality suggest that, in some hidden way, it points to a reality beyond what we know? Across the myths of Greece and Egypt, India and Mexico, China and Japan, and the voices of countless other peoples, one truth emerges. Humanity has never accepted death as silence. Whether imagined as a court of judges, a cycle of rebirth, a long journey through darkness, or a plane of eternal shadow, the underworld is always there, shaped by story, guarded by gods, filled with echoes of what it means to live. The flood myths revealed a collective fear of destruction. The creation myths asked what existed before the beginning. But the myths of the underworld touch something even more personal, more unavoidable. They ask what becomes of us when breath ceases, when memory fades, when the body returns to dust. And they answer with visions that are at once terrifying and strangely comforting. For the Greeks, death was impartial, stripping all but the greatest of their glory. For the Egyptians, it was a trial of truth, weighing every deed on the scales of eternity. For the Indians, it was a cycle, demanding that every action echo through rebirths until liberation was found. For the Chinese, it was a labyrinth of justice, where no secret escaped the records of the dead. For the Japanese, it was inevitability, a shadow that clings and corrupts, a reminder that purity in life was precious because death could not be undone. For the Aztecs, it was endurance, 9 layers of struggle, endured by every soul, until final rest was earned. Different cultures, different landscapes, different gods. And yet, beneath all these visions lies a single truth: the human refusal to accept that life simply ends. The underworld is a mirror. It reflects our values, our fears, our struggles, and our hopes. It tells us that what matters in life echoes beyond it, that courage, truth, endurance, or purity are not forgotten. The presence of rivers and mountains, bridges and gates, punishments and rewards, is not coincidence. They are symbols born of the human condition. Rivers divide us in life. They divide us in death. Mountains test us in life. They test us in death. Laws judge us in life. They judge us in death. The underworld is not a fantasy of some distant culture. It is a shadow of the world we already know, transfigured into myth. And so we return to the question: why did every civilization imagine an underworld? Was it a shared memory of something unseen, passed through generations in fragmented echoes? Or is it simply the inevitable invention of the human mind, unable to bear the thought of nothingness, clothing the silence of death with stories of passage, judgment, and endurance? Perhaps the answer does not lie in choosing one or the other. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the universality of the underworld reveals that human beings are wired to search for meaning in endings, to see the threshold of death not as a wall but as a door. Perhaps in that search lies a deeper truth, that what we fear most is not death itself, but the thought that life might be meaningless if it ends without continuation. Every myth of the underworld is a testament to the same longing, to believe that what we are does not vanish, that there is something on the other side of silence. Whether it is Hades' throne, Osiris' scales, Yama's judgment, Mictlantecuhtli's trials, Diyu's courts, or the shadowed plain of Yomi, all of them whisper the same message: death is not the end. But then comes the question that lingers long after the stories are told. If every civilization, separated by oceans and centuries, imagined an underworld, is it because all were wrong in the same way? Or because, on some level, they were all right?